Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, a very good morning. My name is Refilo Lidwawa, and I'm pleased to be your MC for today. I've been in aviation for many, many years. I know I do look young, but I am a little bit old. I started off as a helicopter pilot, went on to become a fixed-wing pilot, flight instructor, and I'm now the founding member of Women in Aviation, Southern African Women in Aviation and Aerospace Industry, Girls Fly Program in Africa Foundation, which is an NPO currently operating in South Africa, Botswana, and will be soon launching in Cameroon. Aviation has been a key part of my life, and it is indeed a pleasure to welcome you to AviAfrique 2018. Following the success of the previous AviAfrique Innovation Summit, we're pleased to welcome you to this Innovation Summit. We're pleased to welcome you to this leading aviation event as we explore how we can break barriers in the aviation industry through innovation. This year's summit is even more significant as we celebrate the centenary of Utata Nelson Mandela, a man whose bravery shaped our very own democracy and inspired millions across the globe and on home soil to persevere in the pursuit of success. Many of the minds in this room have made massive strides across all disciplines of aviation to become leaders in their field, doctors, and published authors. We are privileged today to have you share some of the knowledge and insight as we explore the exciting topic of aviation innovation. The AviAfrique Innovation Summit is a uniquely African gathering, providing a platform for collaboration between Africa Air Navigation Service providers, organizations, communities, as well as our global counterpart, to explore new avenues and technologies that enhance the field of aviation as well as aviation safety. Before we all begin, of course, we do have some house rules. If I could remind all guests to put their phone on silent, but we do want your phone to be on because we'd like you to share your thought on Twitter using the hashtag AviAfrique2018 or Instagram. You may access the free CSR Wi-Fi. Simply look at CSR guest. Bathrooms can be found directly on both the left and the right-hand side of the exhibition hall and behind the screen on the exhibition hall onto my right. So moving on to the format for today. So we have two apologies, unfortunately. The acting CEO, Mr. Thomas Kokolo, is not able to join us today, and Mr. Mohamed Musa, Director General of ASEPNA, will not be with us this morning. Our open remarks today are made by the ATNS Chairman Board, Mr. Simpiwe Tobela. Now, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Simpiwe Tobela, Chairman of the Air Traffic and Navigation System. Mr. Simpiwe Tobela is the Managing Director of NLKH Holdings, an entity that focuses on skills development in various areas that include leadership, governance, financial management, and supply chain management in South Africa. He has 15 years of senior management experience in the public sector, as well as the government structures. He currently chairs the Finance and Investment Committee of ECDC, which is the Development Finance Institution. Mr. Tobela has previously served in the Mahua Tea Estate Board and other small development agency boards based in the Eastern Cape. He has also served in the Limalitu Trust, focusing on skills development in local government. He has a BCom in logistics, a postgrad diploma in public management, a master's in town regional planning, and is a PhD candidate at the University of the Free State. Welcome address by Mr. Tobela.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much, Ms. Lidova, for the introduction. It's much appreciated. I'd like to welcome you all in this 7th AVI Africa Summit. I know that we have guests that have traveled from far, and I've just been introduced to one lady from the Côte d'Ivoire just now, and thank you so much for coming over and be with us for the next 2 days. Please accept our heartfelt appreciation for the sacrifice of your time that you've made. We know that your contributions will be valuable beyond measure, and we are excited to spend this time engaging in discussion and sharing views to ensure an efficient and sustainable future for the aviation industry. I'm sure that you have all seen the program. If not, please take a look at your packs that you must have received upon registration. We will be following the program closely, and we ask that all panelists, speakers, to ensure that they are available at least 15 minutes before their time or slots. Our theme for this year is breaking barriers in the aviation industry through innovation. It encompasses the essence of ATNS's growth and development strategy. And we really hope to share and gain some critical insights from this summit, as we have from all previous AVI events. As part of the discussions, we will have to look at the mileage that we have covered in the past few years in respect of innovation. That reflection will help us to understand the challenges ahead of us. All this happens in the context of the projected 50% growth of passenger growth in the next 3 decades. The increased air traffic due to growth in passenger numbers also increases a need to be extra vigilant with regards to the safety and security. Innovation must address these critical issues. According to Digital Aviation Research and Technology Center, digital aviation, which includes everything from unmanned traffic management to developing the next generation of air traffic control in an environment of steadily increasing air traffic density, should be a priority and addressed collaboratively by the aviation industry. It is innovation and finding ways to improve efficiency and ensure the highest levels of safety. Innovation is not an option, but a necessity in the aviation industry in the context of thin margins of the industry, as it is in the other industry and life in general. Innovation has to contribute in the improvement of efficiencies in the industry and encourage convenience and safety. With cybercrime becoming more a major risk to our industry, it is becoming increasingly important for us to be ahead of this in terms of security. We need to establish a global cybersecurity center of excellence that can spend their time exploring gaps in the technological innovation and looking at ways to close those gaps and prevent our industry from being exposed to cyber criminals. Statistics show that we transport approximately 4.3 billion passengers in total per annum. We literally have the safety of billions of human lives in our hands every day. There could not be a more pressing issue that our industry faces today than safety and security. We need to remember that our industry contributes vastly to the growth of the global economies. Gathering like this, where we explore ways to move forward in the digital age, is crucial for the growth and development. As per our protocol, all insights, knowledge and information that we will be shared here will be available for everyone to download from our AVI Afrique website, which is www.aviafrique.com. It is important that we have access to this critical content because we really don't want this conversation to end here. We want this conversation of innovation and collaboration to continue beyond just these 2 days. Yes, we have face-to-face discussion, but we live in an information and communication technology era where we have instant access to one another, as and when we please. So it is our hope that this will be an ongoing process that does not end here, but carries on until we meet again next year at the next AVI-Africa Summit. It is clear to me that collaboration is extremely important as we look into new ways of conducting our business. Business sector, research institutions, entrepreneurs, governments, OEMs, all of us have to work together. We are in a global industry that has no rigid boundaries. This we have to do in view of the African Union Declaration towards the single African air travel market. If we put our minds and energies to it, it is possible. Ladies and gentlemen, please make use of the knowledgeable individuals that we have here with us for the next 2 days. Ask critical questions, interrogate processes, offer solutions, collaborate with one another. Let us break barriers in aviation industry through innovation over the next 2 days. And thank you very much. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tovela, for your warm welcome and your insight. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a very exciting day ahead of us. Don't forget our hashtag, AVI-Africa 2018. We do encourage you to comment and share some of your thoughts. We now welcome to the stage our guest speaker, Dr. Adrian Tiplady, SKA South Africa. It is a privilege to call on stage Dr. Adrian Tiplady. Dr. Tiplady is the head of strategy and business system for the SKA project and has a PhD from Rhodes University, specializing in radio astronomy and electronics. He joined the SKA project in 2005 and was involved in the preparation of South Africa's bid proposal to host the SKA and the establishment of the protected area for radio astronomy. He's a globally recognized expert in radio frequency interference for radio astronomy and is currently the only African representative of the European Science Foundation. He's an invited member of the ESF College of Expert Reviewers and is currently involved in the establishment of a treaty organization for the construction and operation of the SKA radio license. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much. I understand I've got about an hour, so I thought within that time I'll maybe give you a couple of slides on science, a couple of slides of innovation, technology, some major breakthroughs, and also touch on the issue of establishing a protected area so that we can conduct radio astronomy observations. But firstly, what exactly is the SKA? Well, there are a couple of pictures of traditional radio telescopes. Really, a radio telescope is a really sensitive radio receiver. Some of these are the more well-known radio telescopes around the world. The one on the top left is Jodrell Bank. It's about 76 meters across and built in the 50s. Some of the other famous ones there to the in the middle and the bottom row is Parkes Radio Telescope in Australia and received the very first video images from the moon landing. And until recently, the bottom left was the only radio telescope on mainland Africa, the Hartebeeshoek Radio Astronomy Observatory, about 26 meters across. So the whole thing about radio astronomy is the bigger the better. The bigger the dishes, the weaker the signals it can detect. And so this, in fact, is currently the biggest radio telescope in the world. It's about 500 meters across. It was recently opened in China. It's known as the FAST telescope, standing for 500-meter aperture spherical telescope. Now, to get more sensitive, you want to build bigger radio telescopes. But you'll notice that this one is actually, it's quite difficult to move, right? The bigger the dish is, the more difficult it is to move. So this one, in fact, is built in a crater, and it just simply looks up ahead, straight above it. So to build something even more sensitive, what we can actually do is break up the radio telescope into lots of smaller telescopes and create an array of telescopes. And this is the Very Long Array in New Mexico, and it's perhaps the most well-known array of radio telescopes in the world today. For those of you who've seen the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, she's pictured at the early scenes of the movie busy using these telescopes to look for alien signals. Now, the great thing about this radio telescope is that the more sensitive you make it, the more sensitive you want it, you can simply add dishes to it, and all of the signals from each dish are then processed in one giant supercomputer. The second advantage of it is you'll notice the radio telescopes are on railroads or railway tracks. So the resolution of the image you produce with the radio telescope, or the dots per inch in the image, is determined by the distance between the two furthest dishes. So the further you spread these dishes apart, the better the quality of the image you can produce. And in fact, radio astronomers regularly around the world combine the telescopes into what are called VLB arrays and connect with radio telescopes across the surface of the planet. And in fact, even with radio telescopes that are orbiting in space. So what exactly is the SKA project? Well, the concept of the SKA started in the early 1990s. And really what it was a vision by the global astronomical community to build a radio telescope that was 100 times more powerful, more advanced than any of the existing instruments that were current in the world at the time. It currently consists of about 11 member countries, 50 or so institutions and industry representatives are participating in the development of the design for the SKA. It really is a global project, a global international project. The international head office is based in the United Kingdom with major regional centers in South Africa and Australia. And it will be developed through a phased implementation, the first phase in approximately starting in 2021 to 2026. There's a conceptual design around phase 2 of the SKA, which will actually see radio telescopes located in our African partner countries. And we're currently busy establishing a treaty organization known as the SKA Observatory, which will hopefully commence ratification during the course of next year. So this is my only science slide, but I thought when I'm giving a talk about the SKA, and no matter what the audience is, I have to put in a science slide. Right? So, when you're building a radio telescope or any kind of telescope, it's almost as if you're building a time machine. When you see the sun set every day, it's taken 8 minutes for light to reach us from the sun. So in fact, whenever you see the sun set 8 minutes ago, and you're only seeing the light reach us now. When you look at the stars at night, the light from many of those stars has taken hundreds, if not thousands of years to reach us. So many of the stars that you see there may have exploded already and died, but we just don't know it yet because the light is still traveling to us. When you build a telescope, what you're trying to do is you're trying to detect weak signals that have been traveling across the universe for millions, if not billions of years. And hopefully what we hope to do with the SKA radio telescope is to be able to detect signals that have been traveling across the universe since the beginning of the universe itself. And in 20 years' time, I may very well put a presentation up here with an animation or a video which shows the birth of the universe and the evolution of stars and galaxies over the last 13 or so billion of years. Now, how did the SKA come to Africa? Well, there was a competitive bid process that was concluded in 2012, which effectively saw the SKA radio telescope split between Africa and and Australia. And one always asks, well, why would South Africa, why would a country like South Africa actually want to host something like the SKA, which will be one of the most technologically advanced scientific facilities to have ever been built? And I often liken it to something like the Soccer World Cup. Right? In 2010, and I do say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, we hosted a very successful Soccer World Cup. But what did that do? Why did we do it? Well, it showed the world that South Africa was a great place to come on a safari holiday. It showed the world that we could host an international sporting event for 6 weeks. And it showed the world that we could build some soccer stadiums. It cost the country, I don't know, let's call it $1 billion or so. Whereas something like the SKA project, which will be funded by a variety of international partners, shows the world that South Africa is a viable destination for investment in science, technology, and high-tech infrastructure. It shows the world that an independent panel chose South Africa to host what will be one of the most important scientific facilities in the world for 50 years. And I think it sends a different message to the world, which is sustainable about long-term investment in the country. And I think, we often refer to it as the World Cup of Science with lasting impact. And I think that's already having an impact locally within South Africa. Just a couple of the headlines and newspaper articles that have been written around the SKA. And what the SKA is really about is also about development of a knowledge economy in South Africa. That we move away from a resource-based economy, exporting gold, diamonds, etc., and we move towards a more knowledge-based economy. Right. Now, one of the reasons why the South African government identified astronomy, in particular radio astronomy, as a key strategic scientific area for investment is because it hosts what is called an astronomical advantage. This map over here is in fact a population density map of South Africa. And you notice a majority of South Africa's population living on the coast. You can identify big cities like Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town. But the Northern Cape province has a very, very low population density. It's very sparsely populated, between 0 and 1 person per square kilometre, with in fact most of the people living in Kimberley or Uppington. Now, population density and the distribution of population is a reasonably good proxy for identifying the presence of radio frequency interference. And radio frequency interference is perhaps the biggest threat to any kind of radio astronomical facility. So what exactly is radio frequency interference, particularly with respect to the operation of a radio astronomy facility? Well, for us, it's effectively man-made radio signals that are received by radio telescopes, which interfere with the reception of natural radio signals that are of cosmic origin. Everything around us is emitting radio energy. When you turn your car radio from a radio station, you're hearing that hissing sound. That hissing sound is radio noise, which is being generated by everything around us. Anything that is warm is emitting radio energy, and your car radio is in fact picking up that radio signal. And in fact, probably about 1% of that noise that you hear in your car radio, that hissing sound, is actually coming from cosmic sources, stars and galaxies in space. Radio astronomy is in fact a radio communication service within the ITU, so there are recommendations and radio recommendations which identify the protection levels of what constitutes radio frequency interference. And for those of you who are familiar with the ITU, there's a really good recommendation over there, 769-2. So the type and the impact of RFI, well, we typically split it between two: narrowband RFI. And narrowband RFI comes from purposeful transmissions, things like Wi-Fi, television, cell phones, etc. And the potential impact that it has on us, well, very strong radio signals could potentially damage radio receivers. Medium strength signals could potentially saturate receivers, making them inoperable. And very weak signals can often be masked as false detections of real astronomical signals. So that's one type of interference. The second type of interference is broadband interference, things that come from sparking on arc welders, on spark plugs on petrol vehicles, etc. And those also give very similar types of impact on radio receivers. And how do we mitigate? And I think this is quite important because when you're trying to establish a radio astronomy facility within a remote area, what you need to do is try to understand the potential existing environment and the potential impact of RFI and see how you can mitigate that impact of RFI. And effectively, we deal with it on two sides. The first is the receive side. So radio telescope is extremely sensitive. We can detect a cell phone on Jupiter if we really wanted to. Right, so you can imagine that we live within from our point of view, quite a noisy radio frequency environment, and we do quite a lot to mitigate the impact of that. We can potentially put filters on radio receivers for radio telescopes, and we can effectively mask out data that we are receiving that is polluted with RFI. Then we have a look at the transmission side. And typically there are various strategies that one employs to try to mitigate the impact of radio signals that have been received, and we can usually use what are called spectral strategies, so that's moving radio transmissions in different parts of the used spectrum. Spatial strategies, so for example, pointing antennas away from a radio telescope will obviously have a mitigating impact on us. And also operational use strategies and how we use the radio frequency environment. Now, the South African government recognized the strategic advantage, and so during the course of 2007-2008 promulgated what was called the Astronomy Geographic Advantage Act. And this is an empowering piece of legislation which empowers the Minister of Science and Technology to declare protected areas around strategic astronomy sites. And I won't go into too much detail into this act, but there are various types of protected areas that one can declare. And it takes the same approach as the Electronic Communications Act of South Africa, that by effectively prohibiting use of radio transmitters within the area and then licensing or to approve those transmissions and use of radio apparatus. So, how do we go about implementing the Act? Well, the idea is to establish an area where spectrum is managed in a manner that achieves the objectives of the Act and ensures the provision of designated services. So optimization of the radio frequency environment as opposed to the creation of a radio quiet zone. And unfortunately, this term is used quite often both locally and internationally, that radio astronomy facilities need to establish this radio quiet zone, which is the complete absence of any kind of radio frequency transmissions. And that is quite far from the truth. In fact, the intent here is to create an optimized environment that optimizes the use of the spectrum for local users and also then creates space for radio astronomy facilities to operate. And here's a really good example. That is a spectral plot of the radio frequency environment in the Karoo. And you can see there are lots of signals there. There's low frequency signals, FM radio stations. I don't have a pointer, but there's a batch of satellite signals at around about 200 megahertz, 250 megahertz. In fact, that's a US military satellite constellation. And there's a variety of UHF and VHF broadcasting signals. Now, the digital migration program within South Africa, specifically within the Karoo environment in the Northern Cape province, has moved towards satellite-based reception of television signals. Right. So the movement away from analog terrestrial transmissions to satellite-based transmissions has effectively optimized the use of the radio frequency environment within the Karoo region and opened up a huge amounts of what was traditionally broadcasting spectrum for use potentially for use by radio astronomy and radio astronomy facilities without impacting on the provision of those broadcasting services. Now, what is important is during the course of this process, in the course of establishment of a protected area, the Minister had to develop regulations for promulgation and for protection of these declared areas. Aviation has been excluded from applicability for those regulations on the basis that we are engaging with the aviation sector department, government departments, the CA, ATNS, etc., to develop sets of regulations that may be enforced through the Civil Aviation Authority in South Africa, ultimately to ensure that there's provision of critical aviation-related services in the area, but will enable the SK to still operate. Now that's a bit of a busy slide, and that's also a bit of a busy slide. So I won't go into too much detail on these slides, but rather to say that there's a host of engagements that are taking place with various stakeholders within the Karoo. The declared area is approximately something like 500 kilometers across, and as you can imagine, there are a number of industries and operators of radio communication equipment within that area, and we're engaging with all those various stakeholders to try to develop optimized manner and optimized way in which those communication services can still be delivered within that area. For example, railway networks, electricity generation makes use of radio communication equipment, etc. The military as well. And looking specifically at aviation, now, if you look at, well, what is the potential aviation-related RFI, we can do some analyses of what the impact is on radio telescopes and then look for mitigation options, and these are various mitigation options that are going to be explored with the aviation sector, and we have a very good cooperation with with government departments and agencies to try to look for solutions in the way forward for creating a protected environment. I'm just going to skip over that, but this is some early results that we're busy looking at in terms of the impact of aviation-related services on the SKA, and these are the results of some technical internal studies that we're busy undertaking at this point in time. But a key aspect of this is, of course, ensuring we have cooperation through various memorandums of agreement. We have memorandums of agreement with various government departments, and hopefully we'll be signing one soon with the Department of Transport and various other entities. So, when you're building something which is 100 times bigger and better than anything has ever been built, you need to build what is called a precursor or prototype. And enter Meerkat. So Meerkat is a South African designed, developed, funded precursor of the SKA radio telescope. It's only about 5 times the size and scale of the SKA, but when you're building something which is only 5% of something that's 100 times bigger and better, it becomes the premier radio astronomy facility in the world until the SKA is built. And in fact, the SKA, or the Meerkat, has been such a successful project that in fact is going to form the first 30% of the SKA Phase 1 radio telescope. There's a huge international demand, something like over 360 scientists from 22 different countries have actually been allocated time to use the Meerkat radio telescope. We've established a site in the Karoo, building something, roads, data connectivity, on-site facilities, a spark-free power line. And I say spark-free power line because power lines spark, and sparking causes radio frequency interference. And so we have to design a power line that doesn't spark. Right? We have an on-site facility called Losbach. Losbach houses our underground processing facility. That's an old picture of our underground facility. It's currently filled with a large supercomputing infrastructure, one of the fastest supercomputers built in Africa, at 20% of the commercial cost. I think one of the most notable achievements in our path and our journey towards developing the Meerkat is a very strong and rigid system engineering approach that ensures that we're able to deliver projects to time, on budget, and to specification. So our CAT-7 was a precursor to the Meerkat radio telescope, and one of the most remarkable things about it is it worked first time. We turned the power switch on, and it did and behaved as it should and what was expected, which was quite a remarkable achievement. So then when we moved on to the Meerkat radio telescope, this is one of the first dishes that were built, and there's a picture of the very first Meerkat radio telescope. And just to give you a sense of scale, there's a man standing next to one of the Meerkat dishes, shining a torch up into the sky. So it's about 20 meters or so in height. So I think one of the most amazing things about this facility is that it was completed on time. It was completed on budget. One of the original budgets were developed in 2008, and I recently did an informal analysis to work out exactly how much did it cost us and how close we were to that original budget 10 years later. And I think it's something of the order of 1.8%. I do say it was delivered on time, but in fact we were perhaps 1 year later than was originally scheduled. But the reason for that delay was to allow us to make some design improvements that effectively meant that the Meerkat operates at 4 times the survey speed and sensitivity. So that's a real case of under-promising and over-delivering. And it's attracted some international investment already from Germany, for example, and from other countries as well are interested. This is what the Meerkat site looks like today. 64 dishes. It houses one of the fastest computers in Africa, as mentioned, at approximately something like 20% of the commercial cost. And one of the first radio images that have been produced by the Meerkat is, in fact, a view of the center of our galaxy, the Milky Way. But I think what is probably more relevant for this discussion is more of the innovation aspects and innovation of technologies that have been incubated within the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory. And we really play in the fields of big data, data science, development of supercomputing infrastructure. So here's an example, Scarab. So Scarab was a concept that was worked on perhaps in 2005, 2006, originally in the University of California, Berkeley. We joined an international cooperation or collaboration, and effectively the research and development around around this computing technology has migrated to Cape Town, and we are now using Scarab for a variety of our computing demands. We need to be able to process, 5 million DVDs of data per day. So each dish is producing about 2 terabytes per second of information, and we need to be able to process all of that information in real time. You can't just store it away on a hard disk and take away your truckload of hard drives to go and process offline. You need to be able to process all of that information in real time and crunch that data down into manageable data volumes. And in fact, the Roach, which is the predecessor to Scarab, has been deployed at almost every single major radio astronomy facility in the world. Here's a picture of NASA Jet Propulsion Labs taking delivery of their Roaches from South Africa. Another technology, which we call Iron Hive, is effectively a ruggedized, hermetically sealed computer. When you are operating infrastructure in very remote areas, particularly, for example, like the Karoo, and you're trying to operate computing infrastructure, what you really want to do is you want to dig a big hole in the ground, put the computer in there, bury it, and forget about it. Moving parts are one of the critical risks to operating computing infrastructure. So, in fact, what Iron Hive is a computer. So you take a hermetically sealed environment like that, you add some GPUs and some hard drives, and then you fill that environment with, I think it's about 1,000 liters of oil. So you immerse the entire supercomputer in oil, and then dig it and put it into the ground. And what you get is something like 500 teraflops of performance. And more importantly, because the cost today of running supercomputers is in the power consumption and the cooling, right? So you take away all the moving parts, you put this thing in oil, and you had a dramatic reduction in your power cost related to cooling. And coincidentally, just look at that number, 30 gigaflops per watt. So many of you may be aware of a thing called the top 500 list. Top 500 is the top 500 fastest supercomputers in the world, where there's something called the top green 500, and that's the most efficient supercomputers in the world. And just coincidentally, the number one ranked most efficient supercomputer in the world today is the Shubu System B, which operates at 17 gigaflops per watt, which is a little bit worse off than our 30 gigaflops per watt. Data storage, we've got something like 21 petabytes of data storage capacity. Right? We are producing a huge amount of information, and so we've had to develop various techniques to be able to manage all of that data that we're busy processing. We have various partnerships, for example, partnerships with IBM to research machine learning, artificial intelligence. We have a number of co-developed technologies with local industry partners. And the data storage here that we've deployed is perhaps one of the biggest storage systems in the world. We have what is called a financial assistance program. So we try to partner and engage with local industry to develop many of the technologies that may become commercialized. A good example is our partnership with a company by the name of Parallax that is developing a passive coherent location system. It's Comrade. In fact, their store is here today as well, so you can go and visit them afterwards. Effectively, what this is a passive radar system, right? You know, there's some various ideas around this, and various other development programs are busy working on this. I think there's a huge amount of benefit. Our interest in it, of course, is to be able to identify and detect aircraft within the vicinity of a radio astronomy facility. So you can imagine putting up a huge radar right next to our radio telescope is perhaps not a good thing for us. And so making use of something like this is hugely beneficial for us. So I think there are potential excellent applications in general within the aviation sector across the continent of Africa. And the nice thing about this thing is it's transportable. And so it can be deployed in a variety of locations within the African continent. Right. We are very much focused on engaging with local stakeholders in the Karoo. And so, in fact, we have a number of interventions that seek to maximize the socio-economic benefits for the local communities. So we invest particularly in education, health and welfare, the number of local empowerment initiatives that we implement, skills training, for example. We've invested in Carnarvon High School to develop science and engineering capacity and technical expertise there. We've invested in an artisan training institute in the town of Carnarvon, as well as a community knowledge center. We have a variety of international collaborations, as well as local collaborations as well with research institutions and academic institutions, SANZA, CHPC, and various international collaborations as well, not with just with universities and research institutions, but also major companies and developers of technology such as IBM and Intel, etc. And we have political support both nationally and internationally as well within the European Union and the in fact, there's an African Union declaration a number of years ago giving support by the AU to the SKA project in Africa. So we have a variety of other international projects that we participate in, where we're attracting radio astronomy facilities or developing radio astronomy facilities in other African countries. One of them, for example, is the AVN program. So it's the African VLBI network, where we're busy converting legacy and redundant satellite telecommunication dishes, which are distributed throughout the continent of Africa, and in fact turning them into radio telescopes. And in August of last year, we in fact launched the Ghanaian Radio Astronomy Observatory, and we are looking at other sites to develop those in our African partner countries, which include Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Mozambique, Madagascar, Mauritius, Kenya, and Ghana. Human capital development. So we have a huge human capital development program, and we support students across the full educational pipeline, from school level right through to PhD, postdoctoral fellowships, and is really supporting people in careers of science as well as engineering, including both artisans, and to date we've issued something like 1,000 grants to students and researchers over the last 10 years in science and engineering. And it's not just a local program, it's an international program as well. So we have a joint program with the United Kingdom in what is called DARA. So DARA is the Development of Africa through Radio Astronomy. It's a multinational program where we train young potential scientists and engineers in our various African partner countries, and you see there's a huge international collaboration there of institutions across Africa as well as South Africa and in the United Kingdom. And you cover everything from lecturing to working with actual hardware, so it's quite a hands-on type of program. I think this is an important article here, and I'll highlight it because the impact of radio astronomy across Africa is impacting on the development of science and engineering across the continent. It's impacting on skills development, on the development of a knowledge economy across Africa. And something like astronomy is a real catalyst for that, and we've seen a huge amount of success in our African partner countries. And what's important for them is the potential spin-off benefits resulting out of this. Looking at things like precision agriculture, for example, strategic decision-making. All of these kinds of skills and data analysis and data science skills are learned within a project such as the SKA. And it's really great to see such excited faces on school children who are really interested in science and engineering. I'm actually going to leave there, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. It's fascinating to hear all the work that's going on, and there's obviously a lot of really good stuff coming out of this SKA. I think there is also perception. It's interesting you use the comparison with the World Cup, because there is also a sense in some quarters that perhaps this is a bit of a vanity project, and we're looking at it from an aviation community saying, well, hang on, you guys are supposed to be the professionals of looking up, and you're not looked at the sky directly above SKA. Could we ask you to go back to those slides you skipped over?
Sure, I didn't want to get into too much detail. That's why I actually did skip them. But I thought you would ask questions. So
I think everyone here, and I'm assuming, but I think most of the people in the room here really are interested in what really is the impact. There's been a lot of speculation, a lot of rumor, not very good communications between DST and Department of Transport and with ATMS and all the other industry stakeholders. And this is a really good opportunity to get a clear understanding of exactly what is the impact, how is it going to affect, and what are you expecting aviation community to be doing?
Sure. Okay. And I think in trying to understand the impact, obviously a number of variables, trying to characterize the potential sources of interference. I think the aviation sector makes use of a wide variety of transmission infrastructure to be able to support aviation, safety of life services, etc. And all of them have a different kind of characteristic. So trying to understand that, and also trying to understand what is happening within the environment. So if we look at aviation-related activity, I think for us we can effectively separate it into two categories: scheduled air traffic, or airline traffic, and then unscheduled, commercial charters coming in, general aviation, use of drones, etc. within the area. And those two represent two different kinds of risks. I think when we looking at scheduled air traffic, it's probably the highest occurrence of interference, right? remembering, and I think we need to start from the position that we are not trying to reach a stage where there's absolutely no interference from aviation. Right? That is an objective that we're not trying to achieve, because we can see aircraft from many hundreds, thousands of kilometers away. Right? So that's not the objective at this point at all. So we recognize that there's a high occurrence of interference from normal commercial traffic in controlled airspace. And in fact, if you look at the graph on the right, the top right, and it was because of the size of the screens as well. I didn't want to go into too much detail because I wasn't sure if you could actually see it. But if you look at that kind of histogram on the top right, that's actually trying to look at, how many aircraft are passing by the SKA as a function of time, during the course of the day. So, and I think these statistics are for 1 month's worth of data. So in a month, you could look at sort of 7 o'clock in the morning and say over a period of a month, we expect to see something like 300 air traffic movements near the site over a period of a month. Right. So to understand the occurrence of that and how often it's interfering, you can see obviously there's a lot of interference during the day, not so much interference at night, which is what you'd expect. Then the unscheduled stuff, because we know where the scheduled traffic is, right? So there's various engagements in terms of how that can be mitigated based on the known presence of an RFI risk. The unscheduled stuff is one of the highest risks that could potentially result from an air charter, for example, is people carrying devices on them, which are communicating, and then they fly directly over the site and directly over the main beam of a dish, which could potentially saturate or even damage the receivers. So now it's not so much about seeing the interference there, but now it's the fact that the interference is actually damaging or saturating radio receivers, which causes the entire facility to become inoperable. But of course, the occurrence of that is far less. We're not having general aviation flying directly over our site 10 times a day or 100 times. The occurrence is less. And so one could suggest that the mitigation strategy for scheduled airline traffic would be different than that for general aviation or unscheduled. And forgive me if I'm using the wrong terminology, so I'm not an expert. And what are the mitigation options? Well, you can potentially reduce the number of interfering signals, frequencies that are used. You can reduce the amplitude of the interfering signals, and how did in order to reduce the amplitude, remember it's the received amplitude, you can either move the source of interference away or further away, or you decrease the transmission power. And also you can reduce the duration of interfering signals, where potentially interfering signal is there for 50% of the time when it actually only needs to be there for 20% of the time. Is that something like that is something like that possible? Right? Now, obviously, when we're proposing mitigation options like that, we're not the experts in terms of how is that going to impact the delivery of services within that area, and that's something obviously AT&S in the aviation sector would be able to provide expert opinion on. But I do think there's a different approach between scheduled and unscheduled traffic in terms of how we look at mitigation. So that graph on the bottom right there is a waterfall plot, and its frequency is on the x-axis, and it's typically in the DME avionics band, and time in the y-axis. So as we're moving through time, you can typically see that there's permanent transponder emissions at 1090 megahertz. But every so often you see the broad stripe going across the spectrum, okay? And what that is, that's actually a saturating signal. So, and we suspect potentially it's an aircraft which is nearby, so maybe general aviation, which has keyed the transponder and caused a very strong emission and caused saturation across the entire band, making the entire band unusable. But when it's not saturating, the rest of the band is actually usable for science, albeit at reduced sensitivity. So some of the work that we have been doing internally And this is obviously something that we engage with the aviation sector on through the technical working group that has been established, is exploring options of how to mitigate. And this is just a potential example. It's not a formal position at this point in time, but it really is just an illustrative example. So if we look at the air routes that are currently flying near the site, we can discriminate between air routes that may potentially cause saturation effects and air routes that may potentially cause just simple interference, and of course air routes that may potentially damage receivers. And forget about the big blue circle. I think what is more important here is the white and the red circle. If we look, and we're assuming that we are losing a certain amount of data per day, say between 4.5% and 7% per air route, we can actually derive distances within which, if an aircraft is keying a transponder, it may cause saturating impacts. That then needs to be translated into let's call it a restricted area, or potentially special rules or something like that. The current distances that we're looking at was potentially the difference between controlled and uncontrolled airspace, possible initial restrictions looking at something like 16 to 26 nautical miles from the center of the core, which at this point in time covers two air routes. But this is obviously more detail that needs to be looked at from the aviation sector, and we need to confront the aviation sector and the technical working group that's been established with information and data like this. But we're certainly not looking at, and I've heard some comments that say, well, you're effectively trying to restrict everything within 1,000 kilometers. That's certainly not the case. These are the kinds of distances we're looking at. That doesn't mean, please don't interpret from this, that it means that, okay, no aircraft can fly within 60 nautical miles of the center of the SKA, or 26 nautical miles in the center of the SKA. What it is saying is that within those areas, we need to look at how we can potentially mitigate the impact. Is it by changing the operational use of transponders within that area? Is it about, are there options in terms of moving one air route, south? These are just options that do need to be explored, and that work just will be ongoing. But we have had data. We have had done a variety of measurements on typical kind of aircraft in the general aviation space. Not too many measurements on the more commercial aircraft at this point in time, and we're basing some of the assessments on data sheets and things like that of transponders and things like that.
So just to follow on, is there a clear time frame that you're working to, and the technical group is working to?
We would like to see, I certainly think over the next 12 months, we'd like to see a lot more progress. There's the regulations for the Astronomy and Geographic Advantage Act are due to come in force later this year, but there are longer timelines associated with that. It doesn't mean that and remembering that the regulations aren't applicable to the aviation in general. And if you look at, for example, the construction of SK Phase 1 is due to commence in 2021. We'll be doing meerkat observations up until then. But, within 12 months, we'd like to see some progress being made. And as long as there's progress being made, I think we're in a good state. It's when there is no progress being made that we'd like to, focus things a bit more.
For that. One might be more of a comment than a question, but needless to say, you're probably getting a lot of questions out of it. As one of the members of that so-called established technical committee, it might be established, might not, because it doesn't take place, the meetings don't take place. What you should be saying is that the experimentation that you're busy with doing by yourselves, there's no collaboration, there's no feedback, there's no correspondence, and when the industry comments on gazettes that threaten pending regulation, formulation, and we comment on it, it all disappears into a black hole, excuse the pun. And there is in fact no collaboration taking place, and clearly you guys have a fixation that things happen on an air route. Those air routes are in fact designed to be flexible routes. When the Air Force are busy with operation, they flexed around that area. When there's thunderstorm activities, they flexed around that area. Aircraft are entitled to, they put all the stuff on board to in fact do random operations, which will take you, and I'm talking about big scheduled aircraft, will take it right over your dishes. So to think that the route is going to be the solution to your problem, it's not. But I think this is a debate that should be happening at the technical work group, to which I'm part of. But we don't meet, because there's always a ducking and a diving. We don't get minutes, we don't get reports, we don't get comments, we don't get opinions. We just have this runaway train that is threatening an industry that also has an end, that also complies with ITU, that is connected to the Chicago Convention, that in fact also employs a lot of people and spends millions of bucks in South Africa. So please take that home, take that as an official input to your presentation from the industry.
I'm happy to.
Can I just?
No, I'm happy to respond. But
No, it's fine. Yeah, sure. I'm just going to intervene there. Thank you very much for your comment, but I think there is a platform for further discussion with regard to that. We'll just take one more question that's technically orientated, and then we'll...
Should we take two potentially? They both had their hands up. So.
I think you're going to be here for the whole day. I think we can take further discussions during tea as well. We're just going to take one more question.
Mine is just a concept. In the data that you share, you talked about the data that you collect and you share with other stakeholders. Should the navigation and air services be worried? You talked about positioning of aircraft, should they be worried with the security?
So which data are we talking about? Radio astronomy data or?
Just aircraft positioning data.
So we're not necessarily providing aircraft positioning data to anyone at this point in time.
I think you mentioned somewhere that you're able to actually detect the signals from aircraft. So I just wanted to find out if at all the form of data that is shared.
So,
should they be worried with the security?
no, absolutely absolutely not. In terms of our normal radio astronomy operations, we block all of that data out in terms of any kind of interference sources. That's something we try to mask out and ignore. If you are talking with respect to the passive radar system, that would certainly be only for our own use as a let's call it a risk detection or risk identifier. We don't have. I mean, we're not going to make that publicly available data. I mean, certainly in terms of if there are any existing protocols or aviation protocols, we would want to abide by those sorts of things to make sure that that data isn't become publicly available if that is seen as a security threat.
We can take two more questions that are two more that are related to the presentations, please.
I think.
Hi, my name's Richard Mallard. I come from the UK. I work in air traffic control in Europe. So there's a big program for the single European sky, which is looking at how air traffic control and airlines and industry work together in the future. So we're talking about routes in the future. It's really about trajectories.
About?
4D trajectories.
Yeah.
And the airlines commit to. So in the future, there won't be such a thing so much as routes, but what we call free routes. So airlines want to fly the most efficient way from A to B. So in fact, the routes potentially be completely different in the future. So you really need to tap into the research and the progress and the expected future of air traffic control and aviation to see what the impact will be. Clearly, that's not happening.
Well, if there's a re-strategization of how aviation-related traffic is managed, absolutely, I agree that that's something that would clearly be brought to our attention, certainly through the structures that either formally or informally exist with the aviation sector. Issues like that would, hopefully that when data like this is presented, that it's confronted with, what are the new strategies, and in fact, what opportunities are there in designing a future strategy? And it's one of the same approaches we took with digital migration. In South Africa, is what are the opportunities in digital migration where we can actually limit the risk or mitigate the risk whilst actually being able to deliver a more optimized and more efficient broadcasting service. And I think potentially the same opportunities lie within the aviation sector. Absolutely.
Problem was in the aviation side of the aircraft, the transponders. But how much damage does it actually do to your results over a day? Because you talked about terabytes of beyond, I don't know the word you used, data information. So the aircraft passes through in a very brief space of time. How much actual damage does that do to your daily gathering of data?
So I'm on the right slide to answer that question. So the current analysis that has been done is it's between 4.5% and 7.5% per air route. Right? But one of the key risks is it's not so much about the interference. If we're going to lose data in a certain part of the band, that's something that we'd say that's fine. That's an acceptable loss. But one of the things that we are trying to protect against is actual damage of the receivers, and that's quite easy to do. If an aircraft perhaps flies directly over the main beam of a dish, remembering it's not just one dish, it's all the dishes within the SKA that it will be flying over, and then fires a transponder directly over the dish, that would probably damage or permanently damage all of the receivers. So that's something that we are, that's something that we have to try to protect against. But in terms of the potential data loss, the point you make is extremely valid. I'm not sure if those transponders are permanently firing or how often and within a specific, for example, if you see the circle on the right, I think we've identified 2 air routes going through there, acknowledging that these are for the majority of air traffic is potentially following these air routes at this time, understanding that there's a need for be able to take mitigating actions to improve your efficiencies, etc., as you're flying storms and all those sorts of things. But if the transponders are firing whilst the aircraft is within that zone, is it firing all the time, or can it delay or advance the firing of that transponder before it reaches that zone? That's something that would have to be interrogated. But At this point in time, just based on our own assumptions, it looks like between 4.5% and 7.5%, based on the traffic data that we've been provided for a single month.
That's 7% per day, or that's 7% per month?
Would be, the same. So I guess worst case scenario, it's 12%, assuming those two areas.
And then just, if I may, if before this whole project was established or we started building this, sure you would have known the problem with the aircraft transponder. Transponders aren't new. So my mindset has been, well, we should just build this into the actual radar dish beforehand, or ways of mitigating or blocking this transponder code. And also you've also got airborne weather radar, which is, I would assume, more dangerous than the transponder.
So we're busy going through a design process at this point in time to see what mitigating effects, measures that we can implement in the actual design to try to make the receivers more robust in terms of the maximum power that it can receive without damaging itself. So that actually goes into that detailed design process now. There's a final system design review that happens during the course of next year. But so those things are taken into account. It's like satellites, for example. We have to be able to operate in an environment where there are satellites going overhead all the time, where there are emergency services being used, where there's rural safety concerns that need to be addressed, and that we need to ensure provision of what we call alternative communications for those kinds of services within the area. So it certainly is a radio frequency environment that we have measured and monitored, and now we're trying to engage with stakeholders to see how we can mitigate as far as possible. We have to have that conversation. We have to have a conversation with all the various stakeholders to see what can we do on our side, what can you do on your side to ensure an appropriate coexistence of those various services. It hasn't just started with aviation, it's also happened and been completed with various other stakeholders within government and the private sector as well.
I'd like to ask a question. Thank you.
Hi.
Surely in your design phase, you must have understood how aviation works. That every single aircraft that is on an official flight plan, so I'm not just talking about scheduled commercial aircraft, I'm talking about every aircraft that is flying between one area and another, goes over has to have a transponder. It is mandatory to have a transponder. And that transponder is firing all the time. All the time. From the very moment the aircraft is switched on to the very moment the aircraft is switched off. So surely you had to know this information before you started the whole project.
So, yeah. I mean, the two processes that have gone on here, right? And the site that has been identified is still one of the best sites in the world to host a radio astronomy facility. Right? But it does require engagement. And that's the process that we're going through now, right? And we expect, stakeholders, the South African government has identified that this is as a key scientific project, right? And it has multiple number of stakeholders. You can't extract yourself from the process and choose not to engage, right? And I guess that's, I'm not sure if your question or comment is basically saying, go away as long as you don't impact us, we're absolutely happy with you.
Okay.
Okay. I think this is definitely a very interesting and a robust discussion, and I think we can take it over tea. And Dr. Tiplady will be happy to answer any more questions over tea. Okay, thank you very much. It was a very, very insightful presentation. As a pilot and as an aviator, I certainly learned a lot. And we hope those teams, technical teams that are supposed to come together, will come together and we can be able to resolve whatever the outstanding issues are. Because I believe this is a very exciting project and the impact is profound in terms of the development in South Africa. I think one of the good stories. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to now take a break, a tea break. It will be served at the foyer as well as at the back of the exhibition hall. Okay, thereafter I'll announce when we're ready to start with our presentation, addressing development in the aviation sphere in the separate presentation area. This will be as follows. The CSIR will be presenting at Area 1, ATNS, Air Traffic Management, in presentation Area 2, the Academy of Science of South Africa in presentation Area 3, and the Technology Innovation Agency in presentation Area 4. Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Tiplady, and if we can please give him a warm round of applause. Okay, enjoy your tea.
then there's a problem. 1 2 1 2. Bega. 1 2 1 2 1 2. But you have to reduce it.
Yeah.
Can you reduce it? Can you reduce the input? Yeah, just reduce the input as much as possible, because 1 2 1 2. Yeah, one. Are you reducing? 1 2 1 2. But it's just depend ukuthi umuntu.
Umuntu ongikhuluma kanjani?
Yeah, but ungam la.
It's me.
Because I speak.
You speak loud. I'm not as loud, but I can also be loud if I want to. So is the sound fine? Test, test. Test, test 1 2.
By the fourth time I'm seeing this.
Okay, yeah. But once you start, the first intro, that's.
Yeah, usually it starts.
But once you start, you're fine. So you'll be able to move from slide to slide. So we must get our side covered. Yeah.
Here.
I didn't see you drinking tea or anything. I'm fine.
Hey, you know this time of the year with this cold weather, everyone has sniffles and something.
Is it on? 1 2.
have to test you again because we're thinking of.
Let's check. 1, 2. Yeah, is it okay? Yeah. I can. One, two.
One, one, two, one. Slow. 1, 2, 1. Mic check 1, 2. Yeah, yeah, XLR, yeah. One, two. Why? 1, 1, 1, 2. Mic check 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 1. Mic check 1, 2. Hey, Sanbonani. No, the problem is,
No, but I just changed the XLR file.
Do we have somebody with it?
1, 1, 1, 2, 1.
Sometimes it comes while you're in the middle of a sentence.
Still.
You're like, oh, I'm out of time.
1, 2. Mic check 1, 2.
Now, please check it for me.
2, 1.
There are many ways of taking it.
1, 2, 1. 1, 1, 2. 1. Sanbonan. Tiles, 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. 1, 1, 1. Mic check 1, 2, 1, 2. Hey. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 1, 1. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. 1.
I want a student who sits in class and keep quiet. Please come, I don't bite. Remember, it's intentionally that I made the room small so that I don't get a big crowd that's gonna overwhelm me. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? It's a bad thing. Because I can't lie, but if they are not. We still have some spaces here. Students, no fighting in class. There's still some spaces here. 2, 1.
1, CSIR on defense, peace, safety and security. Area 2, ATNS. Area 3, the Academy of Science of South Africa. Area 4, the Technology Innovation Agency. If you can please proceed to the
1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. It's just very soft over the loads of noise. It's good. Small
Testing
bit.
1, 2, 3.
Tiny bit. 1, 2. 1, 2. Now you're allowed. I was asked to talk about youth, but I'll explain now. I'll jump between things here. And my colleague will assist.
Ladies and gentlemen, please move to your chosen presentation areas. We are starting in 2 minutes. Please move to the presentation area, starting in 2 minutes. Thank you.
So they say we're starting in 2 minutes. So let's see what can we do before we start. I normally start a presentation by asking everybody to do some push-ups. I think some people are feeling cold. You know, it's going to make us nice and warm for the presentation.
I want to take the presentation into screen.
Do as I
I'm
say,
going to
not
swap
as
because
I
I
do.
see there's not a lot of youth, so this was targeted for youth.
Okay.
So I'll have to swap between
Did
two
I say something
presentations.
wrong?
Joan, do you want to open the other one and minimize it?
Yes, it's here.
Is
so
it
I'll-
ready?
Yeah,
Because
it's
we
ready.
know that you can see your slides.
Yeah,
so you're
no, I'm fine. It's fine. I will adapt.
Every time you enter your presentation,
Yes.
press this one.
So as you can
Like
see,
a
they are
display.
recording now. So you're going to be good students. Okay, not difficult questions.
Okay.
Because
So that it becomes
I don't want to come out on
Which
TV
one do I need to
struggling
do
to
for
answer
that?
questions.
Because I'm going to jump between two presentations now to cover
So
a bit
then
more
you
of.
can close it, then go back
And
to
it's live, by the way.
I just want to.
So
Because
please
I'll
work with
keep
me.
this on.
Okay.
I'll explain and then
All right.
So I'll.
So when you're jumping, do you want me to unplug? Or?
Right,
No.
so we're just waiting for the signal. You know, in the
Just
movies when they start counting down and then they get to a point where they stop counting and they just do this. So I'm waiting for that signal. We start just now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm
I can only talk VPS and all those things, and they're not a joke, so I'd rather not say anything.
It's because I see, some of us are beyond the age of youth. So just to give you a bit more of insight into what TIA actually does. So at that point, I'm first going to change slides to the other presentation that I have. Take you through to this one. Okay, so we're the Technology Innovation Agency. Just duplicate.
It's my pleasure and privilege to present to you this UAV traffic management system this morning. So as I said, I want to ask that we make it an interactive discussion rather than a presentation. One disclaimer before we start, ATNS has not yet implemented these systems. We're also working on a plan to see how we can implement it, right? So that's why I'm asking that if we work together, it could be a lot of fun. So let's learn together, including me. Right, so we're going to look at just a brief introduction. And one will probably ask himself, why UTM? Why do we need these systems? We can have a look at that briefly. And what benefits do we have or can we leverage out of these systems? Right? So I just thought maybe before I begin or I dive into the presentation, let's just define a couple of terminology so that we move together. The one that I wanted us to define is the unmanned air vehicle, which is UAV. This means a power-driven aircraft other than a model aircraft, and that is designed to fly without a human operator on board. Right, so UAV, unmanned air vehicle. It does not have a pilot on board, but it can fly, and at some stage it can even transport people. And we know that emerging technologies, we know it, we're going to get into a point where people will be transported by these systems that will not have pilots on board. Right, so a UAV system, it's a set of configurable elements consisting of aircraft, the control station, the command and control links, and any other elements as may be required during the flight operation. So UAV is part of a UAS system because this encompasses the aircrafts, the systems that we use to visualize or control these crafts. Right? Everybody understand? Thank you. So now, with that just brief understanding, now we just take a look at a UTM, and I needed just to get maybe a definition that's going to be easier to understand, not very complicated. I said a UTM is an unmanned traffic management and refers to system created to manage drone traffic and other types of aircraft from colliding. So UAVs include drones, UASs include drones and so forth. So the UTM is actually a system that we need to look into, create, so that we can make sure that we have control over these systems. As you know, they are not like your aircrafts as you know them, and they have limitations in terms of operability and so forth. So there is a need to develop a system that's going to look in terms of how do we control these systems, right? So I sort of had a look at what will this system look like. So if you look at this diagram that we've put up here, so we have a UTM service or system in the center. Then on the left on the left top we have the registration database. Now why is that important? So for an ANSP to approve an operation of a UAS system in control airspace or in airspace that they are in charge of, they will need to know if this systems has been correctly registered. So this information needs to become readily available, so that the process fast-tracked. Now, the drone operator authority, they will obviously have that registration database, and that is going to make their approval process to be quicker. And obviously, if we have that, first of all, we can tick now to say this system is correctly registered. And why do we need this system to be registered in the first place? We need them to be registered so that we can be able to share with them a critical flight information. For instance, where they want to operate, if it is a restricted area, we need to make them aware of that. If it's in a control area, a space where their operations cannot be approved, now they need to know about that. So that helps with the NSP to be able to share that information with them. So again, NSP, sometimes the system will need to file flight plans, and NSP will be required to either approve or reject. And sometimes, and again, as I did say at the beginning of this presentation, that ATNS has not yet deployed this system. So the thinking is maybe in the future with the emerging technology that we can have a system like a smart strip CATM system where we could be able to process this request. So as you can see on the far right, that we could have a system like that that could be able to produce flight strips, which we use in terms of controlling to track the movement and operation of this system. So, and obviously requirements like your voice connections were required in private and secure. So we will need to stipulate that if it's required. So as you can see, just this brief illustration. So we have our normal operators, which are manned aeroplanes, and we have your drones sort of that are now coming into that airspace with limitations, and that's where most of the challenges come, because they, as much as they're operating here, they have limitations. And we know with emerging technology, there's further developments that they're busy working on in trying to make sure that the systems comes as close as possible to the your manned aeroplanes, for instance. Okay, then I took also this, and apologies, it doesn't, it's not very clear, but it also another illustration of a sort of a UTM system, but this is sort of a little bit on a higher level than the one we saw. I just used the first one because I thought it was simple and sort of maybe easier to understand than this one. But you still also have ATM systems. You have UAS systems, and you have UAS, which talks to your navigational requirements and so forth. So this system obviously, brings together all these various aspects and make sure that they can all operate within one area. So like I said, this is just an illustration of a sort of a mature UTM system where all the systems are operating together with one another. Right, so why the need for this UTM? So part of the reason is that the increase in remotely piloted aircraft system, that is RPAS and unmanned area vehicles, has given rise to the development of this UAS traffic management. In Europe, they call it EU space. So we are all aware that there is really a large number of, or an increase in operation or requests for operation of these systems. And as technology improves, they're being built even today. So there is a need basically to integrate them or seamless into our operations. Fortunately or unfortunately, the traffic that we had, that we keep having, is not disappearing as these systems are increasing. It's still there. It's also increasing. So you can see that if we don't have a sound system that's going to look into this, we would end up with a problem of capacity and other related challenges. So UTM system should be interoperable with existing ATM and can be demonstrated to be at an equivalent level of safety and comply with the rules of airspace. So we are looking for a system that is going to plug into the current ATM systems that we have. It's not going to help us if we develop a system that's going to be a standalone, because as you know, like I said, we have one airspace, and these systems are coming into this one airspace that already has your ATM, other ATM systems that are already operating. The challenge is that those systems are more developed, and these ones are not very developed. So that's why we will need a system, whatever system that we bring in, it should be able to plug into these existing systems seamlessly. So it is also important that UTM system should not be developed in isolation from current ATM systems. So for the very same reasons that it needs to be interoperable with the existing systems. Okay, so I then looked at, as I said when I started, why do we need this system? So we have an airspace structure and a traffic service which are based on manned aviation, not remotely piloted aircraft, which is read as an unequipped aircraft. So this is the reality.
Public funds, so these things are usually normally excluded. We also do not fund people just wanting to do normal business activities. There needs to be some element of innovation to this, either product, process, or service type of innovation to that. So you will see that CapEx and OpEx is excluded, but I will explain a bit more.
We say these outposts are operating in a
so what do we offer to the youth? So we offer both financial and non-financial support. This is mainly through vouchers, which the other funding instruments are not. If you are beyond this age, the money will not be dispersed through a voucher system, but it will go to the people that are actually doing the tech.
So I don't know if
we do prototype development and testing through our technology stations, our technology platforms, or if they do not cover that specific area or do not have the required expertise, we bring in another service provider to assist the youth to develop their ideas. We provide IP support.
But
it's either through our own IP models that we have, or we bring in a service provider that they can go to that's closer to them, that they can consult with. We provide them with money to set up their enterprise, to register their business, and then we provide them with, incubation support, mentoring skills, and enterprise development training to see how best they can grow their business.
So what you can see can actually
the tier application process,
so imagine
it's more or less similar for all the other funding instruments. There's just a little bit of a difference. We issue calls for proposals, or we work through targeted initiatives if we know we want to target a specific solution that we need, or a specific group, or a specific
operating. If they've got no idea who's also operating in this airspace, it could really create a problem. So risk to aviation is primarily due to the non-compliant or uninformed operators. And it's not commercial operations that are coordinated with and approved by a regulator. So what we're saying here is that there's a lot of non-conformity within the existing system because of the obvious limitations that these systems have. So, and obviously the integration part of needs to look in terms of, first of all, do we teach these operators in terms of rules of the air and compliance with the airspaces and so forth. Okay, so another issue that we faced with is operator lack of aviation and airspace knowledge, the communication, terminology, coordination, and procedures. So again, and we know that sometimes we have really pilots that have got existing licenses that are trained or that work with with these drones or RPSs or UASs, as you like. But some of them are very new in this area. And for them, the aviation knowledge per se, to know that this particular airspace has got these particular rules, and to comply with those particular rules within that airspace, also that poses a challenge, and it takes a lot of training and so forth. And so the other issue will be effect on aviation spectrum, and we know that, like I said, we already have aeroplanes that are existing that are using transponder codes. And also, there's manufacturers that, as we speak, are busy also manufacturing newer and more modernized aircrafts, and they're going to be a need for them to use this spectrum. Now, with this influx of these systems, and if we want them to be visual, so that we can see them and we can provide proper assistance to them, now there is a challenge that we're facing, the limitation in terms of spectrum. Also, when you look at the aerodrome and terminal RPS currently operating, they're unable to interact or seamless into the ATM system because they're not equipped with the avionics that your normal aeroplanes are equipped with. And we know there is calls for these systems to have standard operating systems on board, but again, there is challenges in terms of their size and so forth, and they can carry so much equipment. And again, some of them, we develop them for specific use, and so space becomes a limitation in terms of what you can put in there. And again, it could have a challenge in terms of maneuverability of that system. The more we load it of equipment, the more it can become a challenge. I think this was just a repeat. You can skip it. Thanks. So we have also the issue of cybersecurity and terrorism, which extend a challenge with this RPS. And I don't even want to dwell more on the security aspect of it. And you can all appreciate that, the cybersecurity, as it's becoming a challenge with the innovative technology that's coming up. And I mean, we cannot rule the challenge of cybersecurity attacks and so forth. So RPS, unfortunately, they're not immune to these challenges. They also go through the same challenges, and there is a need that manufacturers work on systems that are going to be protecting these UAS systems from the cyber attacks. So the other issue that we have, obviously, is the emergency procedures, and the expectation is that they should mirror the existing emergency procedures that are made for manned aeroplanes. Now, we know the limitation here is that these systems, they don't have pilot on board. So there is a limitation in terms of reaction and action in terms of emergency, because the message has to be relayed into the operator, and then the operator will then control that system wherever it is. So we're seeing that as a challenge, and again, the question is, can it mirror the existing emergency plans that we have? Or is there a need to adjust the plans and make sure that they accommodate these systems? Because as we know, fortunately or unfortunately, they are here. And there is no way of getting rid of them. They are here. So we need to work together with them, with industry, to make sure that we develop plans that are going to be conducive, interoperable with all the systems. So there's also the need to develop the regulatory framework. And this talks to rules and making sure that the rules are applicable to all. And again, as we talk today, we have a framework in terms of regulatory expectation, needs, or requirements thereof of the existing aircrafts. The question is, can this system comply with those rules? Is there a need that we need to look into them? And just to share with you, ATNS, we work very closely with our regulator to try and find a sort of an overarching plan how we could, seamlessly have these systems comply with regulations without negatively impacting the systems that are already in existence today. So there is a need for that plan to be developed properly and make sure that nobody is, affected negatively by that. Right, so having said all that, and obviously there must be some kind of benefits, hence we want to develop this system. And one of them is enhanced situational awareness and ensure seamless operations for both manned aircraft and UAVs. So if you just go back slightly and you remember that picture that we showed. So the picture encompasses your regulator, your NSP, or all the role players in the airspace. So if all come together, if all work together, obviously we could have an enhanced situational awareness, and that could lead to improved safety. So this UTM system initially addresses lower complexity environment where technology requirements and service should be the least stringent. Can it be? And that's a question. Again, yes, we know the target is for these systems to operate below 400 foot, which is known as an unmanned airspace. But again, we know that even in that airspace, you cannot just fly willy-nilly. You still need to maintain some kind of safety with other users in that airspace. Although you may not be required to comply with ATC stringent requirements, but there's still other UAS systems operating there, and there's other aircrafts that are operating there, which are manned, and there is a need that that gets looked into and make sure that everybody can share this airspace without negatively affecting the others. So, and again, UTM, according to an environmentally risk and complexity scales, allow for scalable, flexible, adaptable service that are right size for the environment rather than one size fits all. So what we're saying is we cannot just take one blanket and go and make sure that everybody complies with that, and we need to think outside of the box and make sure that everybody's needs are taken into consideration. When we do introduce this system, the one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to impact on the industry that's already flying. We don't want to do that. We don't want to induce more risk into the systems that are already operating. But as we have seen that there's a lot of limitations with this system, and unfortunately those things are inherent with us bringing these systems on board. So that's why there's a need for a robust plan that must be developed and make sure that there's a seamless integrations of this system. So UTM design will enable new technology and automation, both ground-based and airborne, and allow for more advanced form of interaction within the UTM environment through interoperable system capable of digital information and data exchange. You all know we live in the swim world these days in time, and with the availability of data and digitization, and there is a need that these systems is able to leverage on that, and also be able to produce data that can be used and to be maintained for decision making in the future. And this system will also ensure the range of US demand business model applications and technologies support safe, efficient operation that coexist with manned aircrafts. And this is really what we want to do. We want to get into a space where we can deploy technology that are gonna really support and be interoperable with the existing systems. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my story. And if you want to know, I'm sticking to it. I think we've got about 5 minutes or so. Then we can take 1 or 2 questions. And remember, like I said, this is being recorded, so not difficult questions.
Thank you. The one is a question and the one is a comment. The question is this system designed for UAVs that are on an approach at the airport, or is it, or the airspace at large? That's the question. And the comment is, it's a good system, and as aviators, I would encourage that we be more proactive than reactive, because as it is, UAVs are already flying. So the lives of the travelers, the passengers, are at risk. And if we come up with systems, from now on, let us learn a lesson and always come up with ways in which we can improve and not be reactive, but rather have innovation. As this is an innovative summit, let's then practice that. Thank you.
Thanks, my brother, for the comment. And I cannot agree with you more. And we're already late, as it is. Because like we say, today these systems are flying. And unfortunately, we do not have a process where we can allow them to operate. So everybody's doing what they think is best and what they think is right. And the question is, does it actually addresses the needs of the entire flying community? Are we disadvantaging somebody by allowing somebody or by not allowing somebody? And it's a question, but a valuable point. Coming back to your questions, obviously the critical areas, as we know now, is that it's on the final approach. And maybe the focus, I've seen what NAV Canada is doing in terms of these systems they're developing. They basically sort of approaching it in a way talking maybe along those lines to say, maybe we take the airspace, we grid it into different segments of airspace, and then we name it. And then we have an exercise where we're going to sit with operators, and they will know, so that when a UAS system operator wants to operate, is going to specifically say, I want to operate in Bravo 2. And both the NSP and the other users, they will know precisely where Bravo 2 is, so that, we can make this visible to everybody. So, yeah, but, and again, if you look at, we have had situations where aircrafts in higher levels have collided with these systems. As much as maybe the initial emphasis is going to be on the areas around the airports, but we really need to look in the upper space as well. Places like UAE, they will literally close the airport when they spot an unmanned.
It's not an innovative. But creativity is in sciences, it's in engineering, it's in arts, and I wanted your view on how TIA is perhaps influencing basic education in terms of innovation and creativity.
We have run several programs together with others, within the space. We are not as active as yet within, the high schools and things as we should be, if I can put it as such. But we have lots of programs on our innovation and skills development where we try to get into those areas to assist so that we can create this culture of innovation. If you don't plant that seed early, I agree, we will not have that entrepreneur that will have the drive. If you think back to school days, the guy that was selling his chickens or his fudge or whatever are today those people that are making the millions, because they have the mindset, they've learned through trial and error what works,
and they've experienced all of that. So I agree. If we could start and plant the seed, even at even preschool, those small entrepreneurship days, those things add a lot in a child's mind in terms of thinking. And then also if you provide stretching activities to get them to innovate, to think, I'm struggling with this, let's get a solution. Because it's all about coming up with a solution for whatever you have at hand, everyday problem that you can solve. So no, definitely we want to bridge also into that space. We just, as TIA, constrained for now to this, but as I said, we want to expand into the other areas.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see any other arms, so I'm taking the last 2 minutes. An idea is an idea, irrespective of age. Why are you emphasizing age? And now I'm bringing the South African context into play. There are people who are beyond the youth, but who are deprived, but may be having ideas now. Why do you discriminate against ideas?
We do not discriminate. For this purpose, it was just focused at youth, but we do have other funding instruments and mechanisms. There's a grassroots program that looks at, people in communities. We also, as TIA, because we're a public entity, need to play, with the YES program of our president. That will also feed, more to people in communities, see how we can assist, also the youth that's in their areas that might not have that big, novel idea that can be funded, but that can make a difference where they're at their community, and then, through that, assist in improving the lives of all South Africans that we have. So it's not just this, it's just for the purpose of the youth fund, which we fund only youth, but there's many other funding instruments, that goes beyond those ages. We have funded also youth before that were below that age. It's just, then the parents need to sign all the legal documents and things to ensure that the child is protected. So there are many ways to go beyond just, it's not that we are, but this specific fund that I was talking about mainly is targeted at youth between the ages of 18 and 30. So the other funding instruments are open to anyone with ideas. And even if it's something small, like I've said, we have grassroots programs, we have other partners that we have that we can link you to that can assist you with whatever you need to do. Any other questions?
I'm seated on many questions. You emphasize growth at the beginning in your presentation. You later on tell us you've contributed, is it 36 jobs? Sorry, for the benefit of everybody. That was a bit, from the 2012, when you're set up, and the amount of money that is put into this, how do you comment on the contribution towards economic growth through your work?
With specifically our youth program, we are at a stage where we will need to relook. We are busy reassessing the funding vouchers, the way that we fund. Maybe we need to look and expand into other things. So that is currently something that we are looking into. And also we have, other units that's now new to TIA that will also assist us in looking at all of these things and then see whether the value that we've received through this, maybe we need to change. Maybe we need to do things differently so that we can, have greater impact. But this was specifically only for the youth program. It's not for TIA as a whole. Thank you.
Speak about everything else. We don't ever speak about it.
Hello, good day. May I get your card?
Yes, you can.
Oh yeah, busy and okay, kya manora something shota.
research councils. We don't do basic research. Information that we generate or gather is information that is already existing. So it's in the system already. So if you want to focus, let's say, on the impact of pesticides in agriculture, and you want ASAF to look into that area, what we do as an academy is that we have standing committees to look at different areas of focus, your health sciences, your STEM education, your climate change. So there's different standing committees. And what happens is, depending on the subject of focus, we'll tap into the minds of those standing committee members. Then they will go and draw information that is existing, draw it together, and put a report with recommendations in terms of what way forward do we recommend in terms of how to go about addressing that particular issue. In Africa, there are about 22 academies, and South Africa is one of those academies. And ASAF is actually in a process of assisting other nations in Africa to develop their own national academies. Globally, there's what we call inter-academy partnerships, and in that partnerships, there are 135. It's not all academies. There's a lot more national academies globally, but that partnership is made up of 135, and ASAF is part of that. And what this academies and the partnerships does is that assists collaboration between academies, because we are all, as academies, we're not only focusing on national issues, but we're focusing on global issues as well. So we need to speak to one another in addressing those issues. Now, in the case of ASAF, the entity was launched in 1996. So we were celebrating 20 years in 2016. And like I said, an academy is recognized in terms of an act. So we are recognized as the official National Science Academy. We are not the only entity that plays an advisory role, but we are recognized as an official advisory body. And it is governed by science and technology laws. So in the case of ASAF, we are linked to the Department of Science and Technology. And as an entity, we represent South Africa on the global platforms when it comes to the meeting of minds from different academies. As I said earlier, all academies, they are mandated. So our mandate is the same throughout all academies. We distinguish scholars in all different fields. Different fields, we look at arts, because some people don't think arts is science. So we look at arts, we look at STEM education, we look at health sciences, environmental sciences. We encompass all disciplines of science. And like I said, we generate evidence-based knowledge or solutions to address different issues. And what we do as an academy, we can either proactively undertake a study focusing on a particular issue, or we can be commissioned on request. If there's an entity that wants to look at a certain issue affecting the nation or globally, they can commission us to look at that area. And the evidence or the reports or the recommendations that we produce, we take that to the policymakers, because unless there's a policy or a policy is revised pertaining to a certain issue, there are certain things that will not move forward. So we take this information. If it's the Department of Science and Technology that has commissioned us to do a study, we take the report to them and they present that to Parliament. Next. Like I said, an academy is a membership-based entity. So at ASAF, we have more than 550 members. So these are your senior scientists. Scientists from different disciplines, from different backgrounds, and from different institutions. And we use this members as a think tank. So me, I'm from the Secretariat of ASAF. So we look after the well-being of the members and ensure that we meet the mandate of the entity. So I'm not a member, I'm part of the Secretariat. So we are the engine and those are the think tanks. So the minds, the intellectuals that we use to address whatever issues that needs to be addressed. So Secretariat, we are based just here. The members are based at any and whatever institutions. So they are not in one area living together happily ever after. No, they are based, they carry research in those institutions. And when we need their expertise, then we draw them together for that purpose. I hope that, because some people ask, okay, 550, where are they? And, you know, no, we are the Secretariat. And like I said, they represent all disciplines. And one, they give off their time and expertise voluntarily. We don't pay them. So it's a prestigious thing to be a member because you're using your expertise to address issues of national and global importance. So they give off their time. So sometimes you find that we need to do a study and you are swamped with your work and whatnot. So yeah, they really sacrifice a lot for society. So in terms of distribution, yes, we have 74% male and 26% females. So we need more females. And like I said, to be a member, you are nominated. So if by a member, so it's a matter of collaborations and who knows who's doing what. So if your work is not known out there, then chances are no one will nominate you. So collaborations is very important. And platforms like this really assist because you get to know who's doing what, where, how. And then in terms of color, 69% is white, and then 31% is black. And black is inclusive. Anyone who's not white falls under that category. So you can see it's male-dominated and white-dominated. So we really need to do something about that. And hence, later in the presentation, I will speak about other opportunities for women in science and young scientists that are still coming up. Because these are your senior scientists. Scientists that have been in the game for ages and ages. So we're grooming young scientists to get to that level as well. And in terms of institutions, you can see it's lying more to institutions like your UCT, UP, those institutions that, you know, are more elite. So we need to move across to other institutions. And most of the, I don't know what the correct, politically correct word is, but
so first of all, for South Africa, if we want to use the technology, we need to have illuminators because that's out of our control. So from this you can see this is all the broadcasting towers in South Africa. as well as our neighboring countries. So you can see from that pretty well good infrastructure in terms of FM broadcasting in the southern tip of Africa. And then from the previous, that you saw, good detection ranges. If you, for example, now say you place a passive radar every one of those nodes, what is the possible detection range, or 80 kilometer detection range? What is the coverage that you'll get from that? So you can see that you'll cover pretty most of the country. If you have something like 150 kilometer detection range, then you can even further extend that and cover most of the country in terms of air surveillance. Okay. In a very economical way compared to primary surveillance radar. Okay, so past CSR research that's been done over the last few years, static single site tracking. So from that, you deploy a specific node at a single site. From there, detection of large commercial aircrafts as well as small commercial aircrafts. If I talk large, talk about big Boeings, those type of things. Anything detection range between 100 and 300 kilometers. If you go for something like a small commercial aircraft, that's like a Cessna 172 type of aircraft, between 50 and 100 kilometer detection ranges. Okay, single site tracking. And that specific one, so you have a typical reference antenna. This is a normal setup of single site. So you have a reference antenna looking towards your transmitter, and then a surveillance antenna array. This is just a two-element array. And then you do phase interferometry of the echo you received to figure out what the angle is. And you have range information, angle information, and you geolocate your target based on that. You can also go for multi-static tracking. So they typically run this on large commercial aircraft. So in that case, you have a node that only have a reference and one surveillance, but you have multiple geographic area, and then you do multilateration on that. So everyone gets a range of a specific target. Where they intersect, that's where your target is. Okay, so that's multilateration. Then you have target recognition. So because we're integrating for quite long, you can typically detect propeller-driven aircraft, the rotation rate, and that you can classify targets if you know how many blades there are. Here's an example of this. So this was a 7172 flying into the radar, towards the radar. So bistatic range going down, and the RPM of the propeller being estimated by the passive radar, roughly about 2,400. So that's characteristic of a Cessna 172 for this area. Okay. In this case, this is the multi-static tracking. So it's with the aircraft. Well, first of all, the experiment was done down in Western Cape. So tracking aircraft coming down from OR Tambo all the way to Cape Town International, landing there. So we had 4 receiver sites in the field. There's the transmitter on Constantiaberg. The blue track, the true truth data of the ADS-B data of flight SAA 333, and then overlaid in black is the passive radar track, so tracking it quite well. Okay, so passive R&D in South Africa, this is just the role players. So currently the CSR, we are looking into this technology, done this for the last few years. We have academic partners looking into this as well, so the University of Cape Town as well as the University of Pretoria. They're looking at let's call it the blue sky research. We have Felix Electronics, they also have a booth here. They're sort of the industry partners building these passive radars currently in South Africa. Wachtran, industry partner. And then because this is also under the defense environment, Armscor is also providing funding for this technology at the moment. Okay, so that's sort of the role players between industry, funding, and academic in South Africa. Okay, so what are we currently doing at the CSR? As I mentioned, passive radar is still an emerging technology. You're seeing a lot of research and conferences, etc., but you don't see these systems widely deployed at the moment. Okay, so there's currently a lack of market acceptance of the technology, mostly due to long-term qualification data or the lack thereof. Okay, so how well does it perform? The throw-off detection, false alarm rates, the accuracies, how does it change with seasons, weather conditions, etc., etc. Okay, so currently at the CSR, we're trying to characterize the performance of this passive radar over a long time. So we installed passive radar nodes along the Gauteng area, monitor, air traffic in the vicinity and compare that directly to passive radar. Okay. We're currently focusing mostly on FM radio, as you saw. Infrastructure well deployed within Africa. Okay, it's important to take note. And we foresee this to be well serviced over the foreseeable future as well, FM radio at least. Okay. DVT in South Africa, hence Africa, is currently being rolled out. Our network has been, I think it's like 80% complete at the moment, but within Africa there's still not a lot of digital TV out there. Okay. So the near future we're focusing currently on for air traffic control maybe, or traffic surveillance on FM radio. Okay, so at the CSR, as I mentioned, so we're deploying permanent nodes in the field. So the passive radar nodes that you have here, so they're all linked back to a central node that's at the CSR, okay, with some communication links, okay. So currently we're using the SANRAN, South African Research Network links. So they're bringing all the detections back to the central node. And then in real time, you also get feeds from ATNS, the primary as well as secondary surveillance radar data, as well as ADSB data. So you have the truth tracks, you have your passive radar detections, and in real time you can compare the performance of that system then. Okay. So, as I mentioned, we aim to have 5 receiver nodes geographically separated along the Gauteng area, okay, all around OR Tambo. They all produce range Doppler angle information, these detections. It goes back to the central node, where we do the target tracking and then also logging it to a database to see the difference in performance, for example, day to day, hour, weather conditions, etc. And then also reference sources, as I mentioned, primarily from ATNS that provides the primary as well as secondary surveillance radar data to us. Okay. So here's the area. As I mentioned, OR Tambo will be in the middle. So the red circle is the 110 kilometer detection range of the primary surveillance radar at OR Tambo. So our first site was all the green little indicators are the receiver nodes that we currently have, and all the red ones are the possible illuminators or illuminators opportunity that we do use. Okay. So the CSR was the first site up and running. Single node, so 1 reference, 2 surveillance antennas. Then we went to SANSA, so that's close to Hartbeespoort. So that's the SANSA Space Operations Center. There we deployed a passive radar, also a single node. Both these looking at the Pretoria transmitter as the illuminator of opportunity. Then we deployed at Imalahleni, so that's the old Witbank. There's a single base node, looking obviously to that side. We also have one at Potchefstroom, so that's now a dual base. So it's looking at the Kroonstad transmitter from the south to fill in this region, Klerksdorp to fill in from that region, and then so there's 2 reference antennas on that array, one surveillance array, okay, to figure out the angle. And the last one, this one is still not up and running, so we're looking to deploy 2 nodes, one looking at Darfur and one looking at Pretoria at OR Tambo. Hopefully that site would be up and running within the next 2 weeks. Okay, so we're almost ready for that, but not entirely. So from this configuration then, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 baselines, and then we can compare the performance of a passive radar in real time to the actual aircraft flying in the vicinity, because we get the trace data from OR Tambo. Okay. So how does the typical nodes look? So it's consisting of hardware. So as I said, typically 3 FM radio band antennas. There you can see, yeah, well, here's 4 because we have 2 baselines. So there's the 1, 2, 3 antennas. You have a GPS antenna. We're time tagging all the data, GPS. Some RF cabling, that all coming back to the receiver. And then you have a processing PC with a GPU. Okay, so in terms of this, PC, 20 grand. These fairly cheap as well. These antennas typically 1.5 grand. So it's a fairly cheap system at the end of the day, if you take this into account. Software, typical range Doppler angle processing that we do on the GPU, okay, graphics processing unit, normal gaming PCs. And that data is then being logged onto the node, and then with a server client software being, well, first of all, the client software pulling it to the central node at the CSR, and then pushing that into the database, where we do log the range Doppler angle information in real time. Okay. So this is how a typical receiver node looks. So this is preliminary results. It's only 1 month of data. So looking at the CSR receiver node as well as sensor receiver node, what you see is the probability of detection in this region. Okay, so there's the primary surveillance radar. Okay, this is all the air routes that's coming in that we do compare with the truth data. And then if you have look at the color, so a red color is a probability of 1, so hence 100% probability of detection. And if you have a blue area, 0 probability of detection. Okay, so 50% probability of detection is something like light green, going out to this region. So that's quite far out then for us. So this has been generated over 1 month of data. We still need to publish this data then for extended periods of time. And how does this actually change with weather conditions, for example? Okay, so this is the tracking. So this is a screen capture of the actual tracking. What you do see is you see aircraft. So these little aircrafts are the real data we receive from OR Tambo, primary as well as secondary surveillance radar data. And then the purple trail is the past information. So if it's flying in that direction, that's the history information. Okay. Then you have this little black triangles. That is the passive radar detection. And then the yellow orange line is the past information of that. So typically what you want to see is to compare this is the yellow and the purple lining very accurately. Okay, so then you know you're actually tracking quite well. Very good detections. You also have those little spots on the screen. So for example, there's the CSR, so that's all the detections associated with the green ones is the CSR. All the grey ones are associated with Imalahleni, and then the cyan type of colour is associated with SANSA. Unfortunately, Northwestern University was off when I did this, so we just ignore all the white as well as the yellow ones. So for example, there you can see that was tracking quite well. This is tracking very good. Top of that, all right. This one was not tracking, but far out. Okay, I'm just going to pop this through. So maybe look at this specific one here. Going to the next one, and you can see it's tracking quite well. Going back, forward. Okay. So that's the detections from Imalahleni as well as the CSR, not the CSR, SANSA. And that's the cell detection from the CSR. Okay. So if you log this now over months and months of data, then you can start going to the statistical side as well. So for example, here you can see the 2 major runways at our Tamers that aircraft's approaching, so that's very high dense space. Okay. This is much lower density, and we're starting to have deviation angle errors in terms of that. So this gives you an indication of the accuracy we get, also as a function of time. Okay, so this is statistical analysis. So that's the north and the south one. This is the air routes coming down to KZN. That's the ones going down to Cape Town, and this is the north routes, and there's another one going out that way. Okay. So the long and the short from this is, in the Gauteng area, we can have 5 passive radar receiver nodes looking at FM-based transmissions. Okay. So this is permanent infrastructure, static. And we'd like to do the performance characterization, the probability of detection, false alarm rate, probability of detection, false alarm rate, as well as accuracy, given, okay, for example, the seasonal changes, the weather changes, and the transmitter on times, just as an example, okay. So the probability of detection, this little green one, red ones. So how does it change with 2 receiver nodes, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? How does that change as a function of season? For example, winter, summer. Morning, afternoon. So that's the propagation effects. Thunder showers, how does it change? Okay. Same with the accuracy. So you might have 500 meter accuracy quite close, maybe kilometer accuracy at a longer range. We need to characterize that, and also as a function of seasonal changes, weather, as well as on time of the transmitters. Of course, that's out of our control, the transmitters. The next stage as well, looking at, instead of only at FM-based, but at least for South Africa, because we have a fairly extensive DBT live network at the moment. So you can see the 80% live network published by Centec, 80%, so that's all the green area. So it's quite well represented. Obviously, not so much here at the SKA regions, for the reason that Dr. Tipley discussed this morning. Okay, so in the orange is the 88% milestone, so they're going to cover this still. So this is currently live, the green, that's coming. And then the rest, the white ones, will be covered by satellite-based. Okay, but in any case, so if you have awareness of opportunity in the region, you can then actually use that. Okay, so why we want to go for something like DVT as well is it's a higher frequency, typically like 5 to 8 times higher than FM. So your antenna apertures become smaller as well. So instead of having those large antennas, you have something very much smaller. The resolution of these will also improve because of the digital waveform. That's typically a 8 meg, 7.5 or 8 meg signal. Very much smaller range resolution that you get from the radar compared to FM that's very broad due to the 200 kilohertz signal. Okay. So if you have higher range resolution, you can start looking at applications, for example, drone detections, cars, those type of things. Okay, and then as I mentioned, I haven't done this about from Centec. Receiver side, we haven't done any work to say this is the actual coverage as well. Just take note of that. Okay, so I think that is all I have to say. Thank you. Is there any questions? Yes. No hard questions, please.
Promise. Have you had any data collection on thunderstorm activity?
Hello? Okay. Yes, okay, so at the moment, so the two sites that you've seen, so that's the problem of detection. The other sites came in live maybe the last few weeks almost, so I don't have very good detection.
Have an interest, but they are not aware. Okay, 4 minutes there. They are not aware of. So, if awareness is important as well. Yeah.
You mentioned that, if I heard you correctly, the membership to be a member of ASAF, we have to be nominated by people who are already inside. Is it not subjective? And the other thing I noticed that on the institutions that you listed there are a few institutions that are not there, like VETS, I did not say. Is it?
Sorry, can I just make a follow-up to his question, which basically says that graph that you showed us, which was male and white, right? It will never change. Yeah, yeah. So especially on the peer review process.
So the honors are on us. First of all, as researchers, because one, it's all about collaboration. Who do you know? I mean, let's say I'm a researcher. Do I know what another person is doing? And how do I get myself out there? So ASAP, we offer those kind of platforms that we can profile you, like the Young Academy. So we are profiling, we are not only developing or providing mechanisms to develop you as a researcher so that you can move gradually to ultimately becoming a member, because we provide platforms for networking, for development and all that, but also as an individual, have a vested interest as well in getting your work out there. I know there are certain platforms that we might not be aware of, because certainly when I was at university, there were certain platforms that I'm aware of right now that I was not aware of when I was still at university. So we try by all means to get the message out there in terms of opportunities that are available for young researchers and also female researchers. And one way I indicated earlier is that sometimes we try to solve the problem when it's already a big problem. Whereas we need to start from down there. How are we grooming kids from a young age? Because if we're talking about STI, STEM education, the pipeline is getting narrower and narrower because of the messages that are being told at an early age that no, maths is hard, science is hard. So the pipeline, you can see, it's getting smaller and smaller, and then you find kids doing other things except the sciences and the technology. So we still have a bit of a long way so to go, but we are moving in the right direction. Thank you so much for your.
Ooh, I'm not sure. I'll check. It's an acronym. I will check. I think it's Mpumalanga. Yeah. No, it should be. I think it skipped. My graph skipped some, but it is there. No, it's there. It just skipped. Sorry. Are you from Northwest?
Tiny dots.
Where are you from?
DUT.
DUT.
Yeah, DUT.
Is it?
Yeah, no, I'm not a scientist. I'm a project manager.
Is it?
But I studied.
I know the of maths and physics, Professor Moyo.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yes, I know.
check. Mic check. One, two, one, two, one, two. 1 2 1 2